December 1941. The world is already deep in war. In Europe, bombs fall on London almost every night. Across North Africa, armored columns grind through the desert sands. And in the Pacific, the empire of Japan is expanding with a speed that shocks the world. After the attack on Pearl Harbor, the United States is now fully at war. But from the very beginning, American military planners understood something important: distance. The Pacific theater is unlike anything the United States had ever faced. In Europe, bombers can launch from England and strike targets in Germany within a few hours. The distances are manageable. But across the Pacific Ocean, the distances are measured in thousands of miles. Japan's most important factories and military centers lie deep inside the home islands. To reach them, a bomber would need to fly farther than any aircraft in the world had ever flown on a combat mission. And in the early 1940s, no such aircraft existed. The B-29 Flying Fortress was already proving itself over Europe. The B-24 Liberator had even greater range. But even those aircraft could not reach Japan from distant Allied bases. If the United States wanted to strike Japan directly from the air, it would need something entirely new. A bomber that did not yet exist. A machine capable of flying more than 3,000 miles, carrying several tons of bombs, and operating at altitudes that enemy fighters could barely reach. So even before America officially entered the war, the U.S. Army Air Corps issued a request to the aviation industry. They wanted a super bomber, a long-range strategic aircraft unlike anything that had ever been built before. The aircraft that would eventually emerge from that request would be called the B-29 Superfortress. But before the B-29 ever reached the battlefield, it would become one of the most ambitious technological gambles of the entire war. Almost everything about the aircraft had to be invented from scratch. The engines were new, the propellers were new, the defensive gun systems were new. Even the way the crew lived inside the aircraft was different. For the first time in a large bomber, engineers introduced a fully pressurized cabin. This allowed the aircraft to fly far higher than most enemy fighters could reach. At 30,000 feet, the air outside was thin and brutally cold. But inside the B-29, the crew could operate in a controlled environment. Temperature could be regulated. Air pressure could be maintained. Instead of freezing in heavy flight suits, the crew could work in relative comfort while flying at extreme altitude. The bomber also carried one of the most advanced defensive systems ever installed in a wartime aircraft. Instead of sitting directly behind their guns, B-29 gunners controlled remote turrets using electronic sights. Analog computers calculated the lead angle required to hit enemy aircraft moving at high speed. Today that might sound simple, but in the early 1940s, such systems were astonishingly complex. The B-29 was not just a bomber, it was a flying laboratory of experimental technology. And that technology came with a price. The aircraft required enormous engines to lift its massive weight into the sky. The Wright R-3350 duplex Cyclone engines were among the most powerful piston engines ever built. But they were also temperamental. Overheating was a constant threat. If one of the engine valves failed, it could snap and fall into the cylinder. The piston would strike the metal fragment. The engine would explode internally. Flames could burst out of the engine housing and spread across the wing. And because some engine components were made of magnesium, the fire could burn with terrifying intensity. Technical manuals later warned that an uncontrolled engine fire on a B-29 could cause wing separation in less than 90 seconds. That was not theory. It had already happened. On February 18, 1943, a B-29 prototype lifted off from Seattle on a test flight. At the controls was Edmund T. Allen, one of the most respected test pilots in the United States. Allen had flown many of America's most important aircraft during their first trials. But on that winter morning, something went terribly wrong. One of the engines caught fire shortly after takeoff. The crew managed to put it out, but minutes later, another engine ignited. The massive bomber began losing altitude. Allen tried desperately to bring the aircraft back toward the airfield. The B-29 passed dangerously low over buildings in downtown Seattle. But the aircraft could not stay in the air. It crashed into a meatpacking plant near the runway. Everyone on board the aircraft was killed. 19 workers inside the factory also died in the explosion. It was one of the most devastating test accidents in American aviation history. Yet despite the tragedy, development continued. The United States had already committed enormous resources to the project. In fact, by the end of the war, the development of the B-29 would cost roughly $3 billion. At the time, that made it the most expensive military program of World War II, even more expensive than the Manhattan Project that produced the atomic bomb. The reason was simple. Everything about the aircraft was new. New engines, new defensive systems, new manufacturing processes. And every time engineers discovered a problem, they had to redesign the aircraft. At one point, the modifications were happening so quickly that newly built B-29s were flown directly from the assembly line to special modification centers. There, technicians would tear apart sections of the aircraft and rebuild them with the latest changes. In other words, the bomber was sometimes rebuilt after it had already been built. The process was expensive, it was complicated, and it was dangerous. But the United States believed the gamble was worth it, because if the aircraft worked, it could reach places no bomber had ever reached before. It could carry the war directly to the Japanese home islands. And when the B-29 finally entered combat in 1944, the world would discover just how powerful and how destructive that new machine could be. December 1941. The world is already burning. Across Europe, cities lie under smoke. German armies stretch from the Atlantic coast to the gates of Moscow. In North Africa, armored divisions clash in the desert heat, while supply convoys creep through dangerous seas. And in the Pacific, the Empire of Japan is expanding at a pace that alarms every strategist in Washington. Then on December 7th, the war arrives at America's doorstep. The attack on Pearl Harbor shocks the United States into full mobilization. Battleships burn in the harbor. Aircraft wreckage litters the runways of Oahu. Within hours, the nation is at war. But as American planners begin to assess the battlefield, they notice something troubling. The Pacific Ocean is vast beyond imagination. In Europe, Allied bombers can launch from England and strike Germany within a few hours. Distances are measured in hundreds of miles. Airfields sit relatively close to enemy targets. But the Pacific is different. Distances are measured in thousands of miles. The Japanese home islands lie deep within an enormous defensive perimeter. From the American mainland, the distance to Tokyo is more than 5,000 miles. Even from many Allied positions in the Pacific, Japan remains frustratingly out of reach. At the beginning of the war, the United States simply does not possess an aircraft capable of striking Japan directly and returning safely. The B-17 Flying Fortress is already proving itself over Europe. The B-24 Liberator offers impressive range for its time, but neither aircraft can realistically reach the industrial centers of Japan from distant bases. If the United States hopes to bring the war directly to the Japanese homeland, something entirely new will be required. A bomber unlike anything that has ever flown before, longer range, higher altitude, greater bomb load, and capable of surviving deep inside hostile territory. The search for that aircraft had already begun before America entered the war. In 1940, the U.S. Army Air Corps issued a bold request to American aircraft manufacturers. They wanted a long-range strategic bomber capable of traveling more than 3,000 miles while carrying heavy ordnance. It was an extraordinary requirement. At the time, such an aircraft did not exist anywhere in the world. But one company believed it could build it: Boeing. The project that emerged from Boeing's design offices would eventually be known as the B-29 Superfortress. And from the beginning, it was clear that this aircraft would not be a simple upgrade of earlier bombers. It would be something entirely different. Almost every major component of the aircraft would have to be invented from scratch. The engines were new. The propellers were new. The landing gear required entirely new engineering solutions. Even the defensive gun system would represent a technological leap far beyond anything currently in service. In many ways, the B-29 was not simply a bomber. It was a technological gamble, one that pushed American engineering to the limits of what was possible in the early 1940s. One of the most revolutionary features of the aircraft was its pressurized cabin. Earlier, bombers forced their crews to endure brutal conditions at altitude. Temperatures could fall to 40 degrees below zero. Oxygen masks were required for long missions. Crew members wore thick, heated suits to survive hours in the freezing air. But the B-29 was designed to operate far higher than most aircraft of its time. At 30,000 feet, the air was too thin for human survival without advanced support systems. So engineers developed a fully pressurized environment within the aircraft. The crew compartments were sealed and climate controlled. Air pressure could be regulated. Temperature could be maintained. For the first time in a heavy bomber, crew members could function in conditions similar to those inside a modern passenger aircraft. The design even included a pressurized tunnel that connected the forward cockpit with the rear gunner compartment. Crew members could crawl through the narrow passage during long missions, moving between sections of the aircraft without losing cabin pressure. It was an extraordinary engineering solution, but it was also extraordinarily complicated, and the complexity of the B-29 would soon reveal itself in dangerous ways. To carry heavy bomb loads across thousands of miles, the aircraft required powerful engines. The Wright R-335 duplex Cyclone was selected for the task. This 18-cylinder radial engine produced enormous power. On paper, it seemed ideal for the massive bomber. But the engine had one major problem. It was still experimental. The R-3350 had not yet matured into a reliable design. Cooling systems struggled under heavy load. Lubrication issues plagued the engine valves. When those valves overheated, they could expand and snap. The broken metal pieces would fall into the cylinder. Moments later, the piston would slam into the debris. The result was catastrophic engine failure. In many cases, the engine would erupt into flames. Magnesium components could ignite and burn intensely, spreading fire across the wing structure. Technical manuals would later warn that an uncontrolled engine fire on a B-29 could lead to complete wing failure within 90 seconds. For the crews who would eventually fly the aircraft, that statistic was terrifying, and it became clear early in testing that the warning was not theoretical. On February 18, 1943, tragedy struck during a B-29 test flight near Seattle, Washington. At the controls was Edmund T. Allen, one of America's most respected test pilots. Allen had participated in the development of numerous military aircraft and was considered among the most skilled pilots in the country. The aircraft lifted off smoothly, but shortly after takeoff, one of the engines caught fire. The crew managed to extinguish the flames. Then moments later, another engine ignited. The situation quickly became uncontrollable. Allen attempted to return the aircraft to the airfield. The massive bomber flew dangerously low over the city as the crew struggled to maintain control. Witnesses on the ground watched the huge aircraft wobble across the sky, trailing smoke and losing altitude. The B-29 narrowly avoided several buildings before plunging into a meatpacking plant near the runway. The explosion destroyed the factory. Everyone aboard the aircraft was killed. 19 workers inside the building also died. The disaster stunned the aviation community, but despite the tragedy, the program continued. Too much had already been invested, and the stakes were too high to abandon the project. By the end of the war, the total cost of developing the B-29 would reach approximately $3 billion. Adjusted for modern inflation, that figure approaches $45 billion. To place that number in perspective, the entire Manhattan Project, the program that developed the atomic bomb, cost roughly $1.9 billion during the war. In other words, the B-29 was the most expensive weapons program of World War II. The cost came largely from the aircraft's technological complexity. Every system required innovation, and every innovation introduced new problems. During early production, engineers discovered flaws almost faster than they could fix them. Each solution led to additional modifications. In some cases, aircraft leaving the factory floor were immediately flown to special modification centers where technicians dismantled portions of the plane and rebuilt them using the latest improvements. The bomber was evolving even as it rolled off the production line. Yet despite the enormous cost and constant engineering challenges, the aircraft offered something that no other bomber in the world could match: range. The B-29 could fly farther than any heavy bomber ever built. Fully loaded, it could travel thousands of miles across open ocean, and that range made it uniquely suited for the Pacific War. While the fighting raged across the islands of the Pacific, American planners began imagining something extraordinary. A bomber capable of striking Japan directly. Factories, ports, industrial centers, cities, targets that had previously been beyond reach. But before the B-29 could change the war, it still had to prove itself. It had to survive the brutal reality of combat. And as the aircraft moved from the test range to the battlefield in 1944, crews would quickly discover that the Superfortress was both one of the most advanced aircraft ever built and one of the most dangerous machines they would ever fly. Spring 1944. After years of design work, engineering crises, fatal test accidents, and billions of dollars in development costs, the B-29 Superfortress is finally ready to enter the war. But bringing this aircraft to the battlefield will prove to be almost as difficult as building it. In Europe, Allied bombers operate from airfields in England. From there, they can strike German cities and industrial targets within a few hours. The system is efficient, relatively direct, and supported by a vast logistical network. The Pacific War offers no such convenience. Japan lies deep within an ocean that spans half the planet. There are few airfields close enough to reach the Japanese home islands. Those that exist are small, isolated, and often vulnerable to enemy attack. So American planners devise an ambitious and complicated plan. They will base B-29 bombers in India, then use forward airfields in western China to launch attacks against Japan. The operation receives the code name Operation Matterhorn. On paper, it appears possible. In reality, it will become one of the most complicated air operations ever attempted. The problem is supply. The B-29 consumes enormous amounts of fuel. A single combat mission requires thousands of gallons of aviation gasoline, along with bombs, spare parts, ammunition, and maintenance equipment. But China has almost no modern transportation infrastructure capable of delivering these materials. There are no rail lines capable of handling the demand. Few ports exist that can safely receive large shipments, and many roads are little more than dirt tracks cutting through mountainous terrain. So the United States chooses the only option available. Everything will be delivered by air. Transport aircraft will fly supplies from India across the Himalayas into China. The pilots who fly these routes quickly give them a name: the hump. Flying over the Himalayas is one of the most dangerous assignments in the entire war. The mountains rise higher than 20,000 feet. Weather systems shift suddenly and violently. Winds can throw aircraft hundreds of feet upward or downward within seconds. Heavy clouds often conceal the peaks. Ice forms quickly on wings and propellers. And if an engine fails at high altitude, there is often nowhere to land. The wreckage of transport planes begins to scatter across remote mountain slopes. Pilots disappear into storms. Entire aircraft vanish without explanation. Yet the flights continue, because every gallon of fuel that reaches China is one step closer to launching the B-29 into combat. Even with this effort, the logistical math is brutal. To deliver 1 ton of bombs onto a Japanese target, several tons of fuel must first be flown over the Himalayas. In some cases, B-29 bombers themselves are used as cargo aircraft, transporting supplies instead of bombs simply to keep the operation alive. It is an enormous effort for a relatively small number of combat missions. But in 1944, the United States is determined to strike Japan directly. And the B-29 represents the only aircraft capable of doing it. The bomber's first combat mission takes place on June 5, 1944. The target is not Japan. Instead, the aircraft will strike a Japanese-controlled rail complex and industrial area in Bangkok, Thailand. The mission serves as a test. Roughly 100 B-29s take off from airfields in India. For many of the crews, this is the first time they will fly the Superfortress in combat conditions. The aircraft climb slowly into formation and begin the long journey across Southeast Asia. From a distance, the formation looks impressive. Large silver bombers stretching across the sky. The most advanced aircraft the United States has ever built. But even before they reach the target, problems begin to appear. Several aircraft experience mechanical issues. Engines run too hot. Electrical systems malfunction. Pressurization problems force some crews to descend to lower altitude. By the time the formation reaches Bangkok, the mission has already lost several aircraft. Strangely, the Japanese offer little resistance. Few enemy fighters appear. Anti-aircraft fire is scattered and inaccurate. Yet 5 B-29s are still lost during the mission. Not because of enemy action, because of mechanical failure. The aircraft's greatest enemy, at least for now, is its own complexity. The Wright R-3350 engines continue to trouble maintenance crews. Overheating remains a constant threat. Engine fires occur more frequently than anyone expected. Pilots quickly develop emergency procedures for shutting down burning engines. Some crews become so accustomed to engine failures that they joke about the aircraft. Many B-29 veterans later say that the bomber actually spent more time flying on 3 engines than 4. It is a dark kind of humor, because when an engine fire spreads into the wing, the consequences can be catastrophic. Still, the missions continue. 10 days later, on June 15, 1944, the B-29 finally strikes the Japanese home islands. The target is the Yawata Steel Works on the island of Kyushu. The mission carries enormous symbolic significance. It is the first air attack against Japan since the famous Doolittle Raid in 1942. 68 B-29s launched from airfields in China. The flight will stretch nearly 3,000 miles. For the crews, the journey is long and exhausting. Hours pass over mountains and open ocean. Inside the pressurized compartments, the crew members monitor instruments, engines, navigation charts, and radio signals. Every system must work perfectly. Every engine must continue running. Because once they are deep over the ocean, there are very few options if something goes wrong. When the formation finally reaches Japan, the defenses are ready. Japanese radar detects the incoming aircraft. Fighter interceptors scramble to meet them. Anti-aircraft batteries begin firing. Shell bursts explode across the sky. For many B-29 crews, this is their first experience under enemy fire. Despite the defenses, the bombers reach their target and release their payloads. But another problem emerges: accuracy. The bombs scatter widely. Some miss their targets by more than 2 kilometers. Only one bomb actually lands within the intended industrial complex. The mission, while historically significant, produces little real damage. And worse, it nearly exhausts the limited fuel reserves stored at the Chinese airfields. It becomes painfully clear that Operation Matterhorn cannot continue indefinitely. The logistical strain is simply too great. Even if every mission succeeds, the cost of supplying the bases makes large-scale bombing campaigns nearly impossible. American planners begin searching for a better solution. Meanwhile, the B-29 crews continue to learn the strengths and weaknesses of their aircraft. The Superfortress performs well at high altitude. Its pressurized cabin allows long missions with less physical strain on the crew. The remote gun system offers impressive defensive firepower, but the engines remain temperamental. Maintenance crews work around the clock to keep the bombers operational. Every mission generates new lessons, new technical modifications, new safety procedures. The aircraft is evolving under combat conditions. Then, late in 1944, the strategic situation changes dramatically. American forces capture several key islands in the Western Pacific. Among them are Saipan, Tinian, and Guam in the Mariana Islands. These islands sit much closer to Japan than China ever did. From Saipan, a B-29 can reach Tokyo and return without the enormous logistical chain that Operation Matterhorn required. Massive airfields are constructed almost immediately. Runways stretch across the flat coral landscape. Fuel storage facilities are built. Bomb depots appear. Within months, hundreds of B-29 bombers begin arriving at the new bases. Operation Matterhorn quietly fades into history. The future of the B-29 campaign now lies in the Mariana Islands. From here, the bombers can strike Japan regularly, and in far greater numbers. The Superfortress is no longer a limited experimental weapon. It is becoming the centerpiece of America's strategic bombing campaign against Japan. Yet even as the B-29 gains strength, a new problem begins to reveal itself high above the Japanese islands. At the altitudes where the bombers operate, powerful winds sweep across the Pacific. These winds move with astonishing speed, more than 300 kilometers per hour. Today, meteorologists call this phenomenon the jet stream. But in 1944, few pilots fully understand it. When B-29 crews attempt high-altitude precision bombing, the winds push their bombs far off course. Targets drift across the bomb site. Bomb patterns scatter unpredictably. Industrial complexes survive largely untouched. Mission reports reveal a frustrating truth. Despite flying thousands of miles and dropping enormous amounts of explosives, many of the bombing runs achieve only limited results. The strategy that worked against Germany and Europe does not seem to work in Japan, and soon a new commander will arrive to change everything. His name is Curtis LeMay. LeMay is a practical, aggressive officer who believes that war should be fought with ruthless efficiency. When he reviews the bombing reports, he sees a simple conclusion. The current strategy is not working. Something must change, and the decision he makes will transform the B-29 campaign into one of the most devastating air offensives in the history of warfare. But that transformation, and the destruction that will follow, is still just ahead. Late 1944. The war in the Pacific is entering a new phase. American forces now control several key islands across the Western Pacific. The airfields on Saipan, Tinian, and Guam are expanding rapidly, carved out of coral and jungle by thousands of engineers and construction crews. Runways stretch for miles. Fuel tanks rise across the landscape. Bomb depots grow larger every week, and one by one, hundreds of B-29 Superfortress bombers begin arriving. For the first time in the war, the United States now possesses an aircraft capable of striking Japan directly from nearby bases in overwhelming numbers. The long, complicated supply chain through China is no longer necessary. The bomber force in the Mariana Islands is growing into something far more powerful than planners originally imagined. By the end of 1944, American commanders are preparing for sustained attacks against the Japanese home islands. At first, the strategy follows the same doctrine used in Europe. High-altitude precision bombing, factories, steel plants, aircraft assembly lines, and industrial infrastructure are the intended targets. The B-29 bombers climb high into the sky, often operating at altitudes above 30,000 feet. From those heights, the crews believe they can remain beyond the reach of most Japanese fighters and anti-aircraft guns. In theory, the bomb sights installed in the B-29 allow crews to release their bombs with impressive precision. But over Japan, a new problem begins to emerge. The atmosphere behaves differently here. High above the islands, powerful winds race across the sky. These winds are far stronger than anything the bomber crews encountered over Europe. At 30,000 feet, the jet stream can reach speeds exceeding 300 kilometers per hour. The crews quickly discover the consequences. Bombs that appear perfectly aimed in the bomb site drift wildly off course during their fall. Aiming corrections become difficult. Targets slide away beneath the aircraft faster than calculations can keep up. Bombs land miles away from their intended targets. Mission reports begin to show a disturbing pattern. Despite long flights and massive effort, many of the raids are producing only limited results. Factories continue operating, production continues, and the war drags on. The United States has built the most advanced bomber in the world, yet even this machine is struggling to deliver decisive results. It is at this moment that General Curtis LeMay takes command of the 21st Bomber Command. LeMay is not a man known for hesitation. He studies the bombing reports carefully. He reviews weather patterns, he examines damage assessments, and then he reaches a conclusion that will change the course of the air war over Japan. Precision bombing from high altitude is not working. The jet stream makes it unreliable. And Japanese industry is far more dispersed than originally believed. Many small workshops scattered throughout urban neighborhoods contribute to military production. Destroying a single factory may not disrupt the entire supply chain, but destroying the city surrounding it might. LeMay proposes a dramatic shift in strategy. Instead of high-altitude daylight precision bombing, the B-29 bombers will attack at night, and they will fly low, much lower than before. At altitudes between 5,000 and 8,000 feet, the bombers will carry incendiary weapons rather than conventional explosives. These bombs are designed not to blast buildings apart, but to start fires. Hundreds of fires, thousands of fires. The theory is simple. Japanese cities are particularly vulnerable. Large sections of urban areas consist of wooden buildings with paper walls and tightly packed neighborhoods. Under the right conditions, a fire could spread rapidly. Under extreme conditions, it could spread uncontrollably. The change in strategy is risky. Flying lower exposes the bombers to anti-aircraft fire. Removing many defensive gun turrets to reduce weight leaves the aircraft more vulnerable. But LeMay believes the advantages outweigh the risks. At lower altitude, the jet stream becomes less powerful. Bombing accuracy improves. and incendiary weapons do not require pinpoint precision to achieve devastating results. The first major test of this new strategy comes in March 1945. The target is Tokyo. On the night of March 9th, more than 300 B-29 bombers begin taking off from the Mariana Islands. One by one, they climb into the darkness. The mission will become known as Operation Meeting House. It will become one of the most destructive air raids in human history. The bombers approach Tokyo under cover of night. Instead of tight daytime formations, they fly individually or in loose groups. Their navigation lights are dark. Below them lies a city of more than 6 million people. When the first bombers reach the city, they drop clusters of incendiary bombs designed to ignite dozens of small fires. These early strikes act as markers for the aircraft following behind. Soon the next waves of bombers arrive, and then the next. Thousands of incendiary devices begin falling across the city. Within minutes, fires appear across entire districts. The wooden structures ignite almost instantly. Strong winds begin to feed the flames. Small fires merge together, heat intensifies, smoke thickens. As more bombs fall, the situation grows uncontrollable. A phenomenon begins to develop that few people at the time fully understand: a firestorm. The extreme heat rising from the fires creates a powerful upward current. Air rushes inward from surrounding areas to replace it. The incoming winds feed the flames even more. Fire spreads from building to building. Entire streets ignite. The wind becomes violent, pulling flames across rooftops and through narrow alleys. Temperatures soar to levels capable of melting metal. Residents attempt to flee. Some run toward canals and rivers, hoping the water will offer protection. Others hide inside buildings, unaware that the firestorm will consume entire blocks. Within a few hours, enormous sections of Tokyo are engulfed. From the air, the city appears to glow red beneath the bombers. Columns of smoke rise thousands of feet into the sky. For the B-29 crews above, the sight is surreal. Some pilots later recall feeling the turbulence created by rising heat currents. The aircraft shake violently as they pass above the inferno. The fires below are so intense that some crews claim they can feel warmth even at altitude. By dawn, the scale of destruction becomes clear. More than 40 square kilometers of the city have been destroyed. Entire neighborhoods are gone. An estimated 100,000 people have died during the night. It is one of the deadliest single air raids in the history of warfare. Yet for the bomber crews returning to their bases, the mission is recorded simply as another operation completed. Debriefings take place, damage assessments are compiled, aircraft are refueled and prepared for the next mission, because the campaign is not over. In the weeks that follow, B-29 bombers conduct similar raids against other Japanese cities: Nagoya, Osaka, Kobe, Yokohama. City after city experiences massive incendiary attacks. The fires disrupt transportation networks. Factories are destroyed. Housing for workers disappears. Industrial production begins to collapse. Japan's ability to sustain the war grows weaker, but the destruction also raises difficult moral questions, even among the bomber crews themselves. Many of the pilots and gunners had originally trained to destroy military targets: factories, airfields, naval bases. Now they are witnessing entire urban areas burning beneath them. Some crew members later admit that they avoided looking down during bombing runs. Others insist that the responsibility for the war rested entirely with the Japanese government and military leadership. The debate will continue for decades after the war ends. But in the spring of 1945, the campaign continues relentlessly. The B-29 has become the central instrument of the air war against Japan. The aircraft that once struggled through dangerous test flights is now operating in vast numbers. Its enormous bomb bays carry weapons capable of reshaping entire cities. And yet, even after months of devastating attacks, the war still continues. Japan has not surrendered. American leaders begin considering new ways to force an end to the conflict. Within a secret program thousands of miles away, scientists and engineers are preparing a weapon unlike anything the world has ever seen. And once again, the aircraft chosen to deliver that weapon will be the B-29 Superfortress. The same bomber that carried incendiaries across Japan will soon carry something even more powerful, something capable of ending the war in a single moment. The final chapter of the B-29's wartime story is about to begin. Summer 1945. After months of relentless bombing, Japan stands on the edge of collapse. Its industrial centers are shattered. Transportation networks are barely functioning. Entire urban districts across the country have been reduced to ash and rubble. The B-29 Superfortress has become the dominant force in the skies over Japan. Night after night, formations of bombers rise from the airfields of the Mariana Islands. They cross the Pacific darkness and return with empty bomb bays, leaving burning cities behind them. Tokyo has already suffered catastrophic destruction. Osaka, Kobe, Nagoya, and dozens of smaller cities have experienced similar attacks. Factories that once produced aircraft parts, vehicles, and munitions now lie silent beneath piles of twisted steel. Workers have lost their homes. Railways have been cut. Oil reserves are nearly exhausted. Yet Japan still has not surrendered. Inside the American government and military leadership, a growing fear begins to take shape. An invasion of the Japanese home islands may be required. The proposed invasion plan is enormous. Operation Downfall. Hundreds of thousands of Allied troops would land on the Japanese mainland in multiple waves. The battles would likely be brutal, fought across mountainous terrain and densely populated regions. Military planners begin estimating the potential casualties. The numbers are staggering. Some projections suggest that the invasion could cost hundreds of thousands of American lives. Japanese casualties could reach into the millions. No one can predict exactly how the war will end, but many fear that the final phase of the conflict could become the bloodiest of the entire war. At the same time, a secret program that has been developing quietly for years is reaching completion. The Manhattan Project. Hidden across laboratories, factories, and research sites throughout the United States, thousands of scientists and engineers have been working on a weapon unlike anything ever seen before. A weapon built from the energy inside the atom. For the first time in human history, scientists have discovered a way to release enormous destructive force from nuclear fission. The result is the atomic bomb. The weapon is so powerful that a single device could destroy an entire city. But delivering it requires a very specific aircraft. The bomb is large, heavy, and extremely sensitive. Few aircraft in the world are capable of carrying such a weapon. Once again, the answer returns to the same bomber that has dominated the skies over Japan, the B-29 Superfortress. A small number of B-29 aircraft are specially modified for the mission. Weight is reduced, bomb bays are redesigned, defensive gun turrets are removed to improve performance. The aircraft assigned to the mission are organized into a special unit known as the 509th Composite Group. Their training takes place in secret. Their target remains undisclosed to most of the crews. But as the summer of 1945 unfolds, the mission moves closer to reality. On August 6, 1945, a B-29 named Enola Gay lifts off from the island of Tinian. At the controls is Colonel Paul Tibbets. Inside the bomb bay rests a single weapon, a uranium-based atomic bomb known as Little Boy. The aircraft climbs into the morning sky. The flight toward Japan takes several hours. The target is the city of Hiroshima, a major military and industrial center that has remained relatively untouched by previous bombing raids. As the bomber approaches the city, weather reconnaissance aircraft confirm that the skies are clear. At 8:15 in the morning, the bomb is released. 43 seconds later, it detonates approximately 600 meters above the city. A blinding flash erupts. Temperatures at the center of the explosion reach levels hotter than the surface of the sun. A shock wave races outward at supersonic speed. Buildings collapse instantly. Windows shatter across miles of city streets. Fires ignite everywhere. Within seconds, a massive mushroom cloud begins rising into the sky. From the air, the B-29 crew watches the city disappear beneath a towering column of smoke and debris. The destructive power of the atomic bomb shocks even those who helped create it. Tens of thousands of people die almost immediately. Many more are injured by the blast, heat, and radiation. Entire sections of Hiroshima vanish. Yet even after this unprecedented destruction, Japan does not immediately surrender. 3 days later, another B-29 prepares for a similar mission. On August 9, 1945, the bomber Boxcar takes off from Tinian carrying a second atomic bomb. This one is a plutonium device known as Fat Man. The primary target is the city of Kokura, but heavy clouds obscure the target area. After several passes, the crew is forced to divert to the secondary target. Nagasaki. At 11:02 in the morning, the bomb detonates above the city. Another blinding flash. Another massive shockwave. Another rising cloud that reaches high into the sky. Once again, a city is devastated in seconds. The world has entered the atomic age. Within days, the Japanese government announces its decision to surrender. On August 15, 1945, Emperor Hirohito addresses the nation by radio. For the first time, the Japanese people hear their emperor's voice. He announces that Japan will accept the terms of surrender. World War II is finally over. The B-29 Superfortress played a central role in that final chapter. From its earliest test flights filled with engineering failures, to its devastating firebombing raids across Japan, to the delivery of the atomic bombs that ended the war, the aircraft became one of the most influential machines of the 20th century. But the story of the B-29 is not simply about technology. It is also a story about the human beings who built it, maintained it, and flew it. Thousands of engineers struggled for years to transform an ambitious concept into a working aircraft. Ground crews worked endlessly under tropical heat to keep the bombers operational. Pilots and gunners flew long missions across vast oceans, knowing that mechanical failure or enemy fire could end their lives within seconds. Many never returned. For those who survived, the memory of the aircraft remained complex. Some remembered the B-29 as a technological marvel. Others remembered it as a dangerous machine that demanded constant vigilance. But nearly everyone agreed on one thing. The Superfortress changed the nature of war. It demonstrated that a single aircraft could carry destruction across entire continents. It proved that strategic bombing could reshape nations, and it revealed how rapidly technology could transform the battlefield. Today, only a handful of B-29 aircraft still exist. Some rest in museums. A few have been restored to flying condition. When these surviving bombers take to the sky, their engines echo across decades of history. They remind us of a time when the world stood on the edge of unimaginable destruction. And they remind us that behind every machine of war are the choices made by the people who built it and the consequences that follow. The B-29 Superfortress was not just a bomber. It was a turning point in the history of warfare, a machine that helped end the most devastating conflict the world had ever seen, and a symbol of the power and danger of human innovation.